Part 2. This is a continuation of the story. The link to the first part is in the description of this video. Enjoy watching. Now, let's hear the story from Carmine's perspective. I decided that I had better call Nan before going any further towards seeing Ruben, my son. If she got it in her head that I was trying to go around her to talk to Ruben, she could make trouble for me with my parole officer. I didn't want any trouble at this stage that could land me back in prison. I didn't need that, and I didn't want to give her the wrong idea. While I never hated my time there and the friends I made were valuable, I didn't want to return to the loss of freedom. Just sitting at my kitchen table, looking out the window at the busy street, was a joy I rediscovered every morning. It was more than enough to convince me I never wanted to go back. So, before I lost my nerve, I got the number the private investigator left me and called her cell. She answered. We talked, and the world didn't end, but it was harder than I ever expected. The phone call to Nan had gone better than I had hoped. She was still angry with me for cutting her off as I had, but I had no choice. She and Ruben were better off without me. When I was in prison, it was entirely possible I might never make it out, especially the first year or two. Things happened in prison, and they were rarely talked about in polite society. I had been lucky, but I had no way of knowing that was going to be the case. I took the only option available to me and cut myself off from both of them. It cost me more than they could ever know. At least they had each other. I had no one but myself. I had thought of my son a lot during those long nights when I had nothing to look forward to and nothing to occupy my mind. How had he grown? Was he a good kid? Did he have a lot of friends? Was he handsome and popular with the girls? Eileen told me a lot, and she had pictures. I treasured the pictures and kept them safe and dry the whole time I was in prison, but they weren't the real thing. Even so, I had them still. I had no pictures of Nancy, and Eileen never mentioned any to me. She knew that's how I wanted it. I found out later that Nancy was the one who gave Eileen the pictures to give me. I wondered why she never included any of herself in them when I asked to see both of them. I think it was more of a surprise to me than it was to Nancy. She seemed anxious to meet, but I thought I heard a hesitation in her voice. I wondered if she would rather not see me at all. If that was the case, I could give her an out when I called back tomorrow, just let her off the hook. That might be best. Yes, that might be what she preferred. The thought of seeing her again gave me a sudden boost of energy. I had tried to put her out of my mind all the time I was being held for trial. I was successful in telling my guards not to allow her back to see me, and I denied her attempts to bail me out before the trial started, just to avoid having to face her and see the hurt in her eyes. I made the deal to put me in prison just so I wouldn't have to face her. It wasn't a brave thing to do, and any attempt to convince myself that I did it for them was false. I knew better. I knew the truth. I was afraid to face her. I was afraid she would tell me she didn't love me and wanted more than I was able to give her. I was afraid she would tell me she loved someone else. So, I cut her out of my life. Ruben was a casualty of that fear. If he came, she would come with him, and I would be able to see the truth in her eyes. That would have devastated me then. Now I had some things to consider. Eileen told me during her visit that Nancy had sold the house and moved to a small town east of Columbus. She and Ruben lived alone, and Nancy had gone to work at a vet's office. I wondered about that, knowing the amount of money the house had brought and the insurance policy that would cover my salary. She had no financial problems. She didn't need to work or to sell the house. When I asked Eileen, all she said was that Nancy wanted it this way. Nancy also wrote me a short note after I rejected her attempt to talk to me prior to the divorce. She wanted to let me know that she and Hugo had no further contact and that she had quit her job there. That made me happy. I distinctly remember getting that note from the doctor in the infirmary, and when I read it, I almost cried. She didn't love him. That was something I kept. That note is still in the box where I kept the things I brought out with me on the day I was released. They were kept in a prominent place in my small apartment, and I looked at them every day, remembering and promising myself that it would never happen again. Through Eileen, she sent me notes every holiday, every birthday, and every important event in my son's life. She let me know when he graduated from grade school and sent me a copy of the article in the school paper when he was elected class treasurer. She sent me a birthday card on each of my birthdays, a Valentine's Day card, a Christmas card, and she told me what she got for him on each of his 6 birthdays. She told me about his best friend Eddie and how his family welcomed Ruben as one of their own. She signed each one, "Love, your wife." I kept them all, but I answered none of them. Now I was about to make the first major change in my life since I got out. Taking the job with Jason's clinic was easy. It meant getting out, getting my own place to live, and earning enough money to help me begin to live again. Doing the reconstructive work that improved people's lives was a pleasure for me, not work, and I was good at it. They appreciated it and paid very well to show their appreciation. I was making more money than I ever had and was satisfied doing what I loved. I didn't want or need the excitement of the emergency room anymore. I wanted peace, quiet, and contentment. I had 2 of the 3 now, and that wasn't all bad. What I was about to do might well mess up my life. I decided to go over to my parole officer's office first thing in the morning and talk to him about my plans. I thought he might be hesitant to allow me to go, but I hoped I could convince him of my good faith. He had begun to trust me, calling only once or twice a month. He called first thing in the morning when he knew I was getting ready to go to work. He never embarrassed me by calling there and never tried to trip me up by calling at times he knew I would be out. I ate dinner out almost every night and had breakfast at the clinic. I was in the apartment late in the evening, but not much more. He knew where I was, so he called when he knew he could reach me. As a matter of fact, we had beers together every couple of weeks. He knew me well, and I liked to think we could be friends once I was done with my probation. Jack was in his office, buried behind a pile of paperwork, his bald head just appearing over the top of one such stack. I found a clean chair to sit in and waited until he came up for air. "Carmine, what the hell? What are you doing here? You're not due for, when the hell are you due?" "Not due for a few weeks, Jack. I need to ask you something and maybe get a favor from you. Mind if we talk?" "Go ahead. I need a break anyway. Want to go down the hall for a cup of coffee?" "Nah, I'd just like to get to it if you don't mind." "Go ahead, talk to me." "I want to go see my kid and his mom. The kid called me, as you know, and I talked to him. He sounds like a good kid, and I'd like to see them both. I talked to Nancy, my ex, and told her Ruben had called me. I didn't want any problems from her thinking I'd done an end around on her." Jack just stared at me for a few minutes, rubbing his chin and thinking. He finally grinned, slapped his hand down on the desktop, and looked quite pleased with himself. "I made a bet with the wife that you'd want to go see them. Bet $20 on you, Carmine, old boy. You do me proud." "Hot damn." He stood, rooted through his desk, and found what he was looking for. He pushed it across the desk to me. "Fill this out when you make your plans and drop it off here before you leave. I'll approve a 5-day trip so long as you stay within the state of Ohio. Should be no problem since they live here. And make sure I have a phone number to reach you. I'll have to call at least once." "No problem. I'll do like the kid did and get one of those prepaid phones. Big deal. A credit limit of $300. Carmine, Carmine, Carmine. What are you going to learn? That card is one of those new check cards. It's good for whatever you have in your checking account. It will allow you to get cash with a limit of $300 a day, but you can buy anything you want. You can use it for gas or a motel room, stuff like that." We talked a little more, with Jack cautioning me to take it slow with the kid and with my ex, advising me not to get angry or lose my temper. As if that was ever going to happen again. The prison psychologists had made sure of that. I felt my head would explode if I got really angry, but I was ready. All I had to do was find the courage to make the trip. I waited until it was late before calling Nan back. I hoped that Ruben would be in bed so I could talk to her without him knowing it was me. Silly, I know, but so what? I dialed the number and waited. She answered on the second ring. She had apparently been waiting. "Hello, Carmine, is that you?" "It's me. Sorry to call so late, but I had to see my parole officer and finish rounds at the clinic. I hope Ruben is in bed by now. He goes to bed early. He does his homework, talks to Eddie or some other friends, listens to music, or watches a little TV. He's a good kid, Carmine. You'd be proud of him. I've always been proud of him, even when I was in prison. I had the pictures and clippings you sent. They helped pass the time. Thank you for them. You're very welcome. I thought you'd want to know as much as possible about him. I worried it might be too painful for you, but you never asked Eileen to stop, so I kept sending them. I'm glad they helped. So did all the notes you wrote me. I got them all. I didn't answer, but I got them. I'm glad. Did you make the plans yet? Are you coming to see Ruben? Yes, I have 5 days to spend with him. When I come, I don't know how you feel about seeing me. I thought when I called earlier, I didn't give you a choice. I want you to know that I'll understand if you'd rather I just see him. I don't want to force you to see me if you don't want to. So if you want me to meet him someplace alone, that's okay. Why would you get that impression? I would love to see you. It's been your choice not to see or speak to me, Carmine, not mine. You know that. I know, but I was afraid to see you before. Time has passed, and things are different now. I would like to see you both, and maybe you and I can be friends. I would like that very much. There was a silence on the other end, and I was afraid I had said too much. It was hard being sociable after prison. We said what we thought, and if someone didn't like it, they could deal with it. I had rank and protection, so I tried not to abuse it. Carmine, just come when you can and let's take it from there. Okay. I'm sorry. It's hard for me. I'll take next week off and travel on Sunday, arriving Sunday night. I'll get a motel and call you from there. Would that be okay? That would be perfect. I can take Ruben out of school, but I'd rather not. It's getting too close to finals, and he needs to be there. You can plan to pick him up after school and stay with him at our place until I get home. Then we can all talk together. Is that okay with you? You would trust me to pick him up alone without you? Carmine, you're his father. Of course, I trust you. I would trust you with his life. Thank you. I have to go now. Goodbye. I'll call when I get there. I had to hang up before I lost it. God, she sounded so sincere. She would trust me with his life, and I had gone to prison for almost killing a man. How could she trust me? It was more than I could take, and I found myself sitting on the bed crying. But then I remembered I had plans to make and things to do. I was going to see my son and Nancy. Meanwhile, Nancy called. I waited all day and began to believe he was not going to call, but he did. He was coming to see us both and wanted me to be free to bow out and not have to see him. What was that all about? Did he think I was afraid of him? That I didn't want to be with him again? How could he come to that conclusion? He shut me out, not the other way around. I told him I wanted nothing more to do with Hugo. I made sure he got the note the doctor told me he had read and understood, so he knows that Hugo was never part of my or Ruben's life. But Hugo was coming. I was going to see him again and talk with him. I hoped you would allow me to apologize for my mistakes and for making him go through so much. It was my fault that he spent all those years in prison, away from his life, work, and son. I had to let him know how sorry I was, that it was never anything he did that caused me to act so selfishly. God, how selfish was I? Even now, thinking back, it makes me sick to my stomach. I wonder what he thinks of me now, or if he even thinks of me at all. Did he think of me during all those years like I thought of him? How many nights did he fall asleep, longing for my presence, wishing it were me by his side, the way I did, wishing for him close to me? How many nights did I spend feeling the void of his absence, yearning for him, remembering the times we were together before everything went wrong? All those years lost, nights we could have shared, creating new memories instead of dwelling on the past mistakes. It made it even worse for me that the last person I was with wasn't even my husband, it was Hugo, the man who played a role in destroying my marriage and sending the man I loved to prison. Even now, that thought makes me sick to my heart and stomach. When the memory surfaces, as it does on those days when it feels like the world is against me, I end up on the bathroom floor, still wet from the shower that never seems to make me feel clean. Regardless of what people say, time hasn't lessened the pain. It remains as vivid in my memory as the day it happened, and I hate it. I pray that I could forget it, but so far, my prayers haven't been answered. It's done, and it's over. I need to stop wishing and apologizing over and over. It doesn't help anything. I need to stop waiting for fate to come along and punish me so that I can then be forgiven. God doesn't punish the guilty and reward the innocent. That's for stories and books. In the real world, innocents like Carmine pay the price for the guilty, like me. I stayed home, free to come and go as I pleased, while Carmine was locked up for trying to protect what was his. Hugo got off scot-free, taking something that didn't belong to him and paying no price. Sure, he got beaten up, but that wasn't much of a sacrifice for taking what wasn't his to take. I paid a high price, losing the man I loved. When I think of it that way, the price I paid was actually quite steep. Maybe there is something to the idea that God punishes the guilty. Now that he called, I had to tell Ruben. I needed to tell him I knew his secret, that his dad wanted to see him, and that he was coming for 5 days. I wanted to tell him when he was home with me, so I could manage his expectations. I didn't want him to get his hopes up for a family reunion, as Carmine had said that wasn't going to happen. Carmine made it clear that Ruben shouldn't get his hopes up. Nothing was said about my hopes, those were my concern, and I would handle them myself. Ruben was my main focus right now. Tomorrow, after school, I would tell him. Tomorrow is a Thursday, which would give him 3 days to prepare. 3 days might seem like nothing after the 7 years he had waited, but to a kid, 3 days can feel like a lifetime. Should I wait until almost Monday? Would Carmine call when he arrived? What if Ruben answered the phone? No, I would tell him tomorrow after school and be done with it. Meanwhile, Ruben's dad hasn't called back yet. I know he will, it's only been a week since I last talked with him. I would call him, but I don't know his number. He didn't give it to me when he called, and the caller ID showed it as blocked. But I know he'll call, he said he would, and I believe him. I just have to be patient. That's what Mom always says when I get anxious, just be patient. It will happen when it's supposed to. It's hard to wait, though, as time drags on, but I have no choice. I'll wait. Why doesn't he call while I'm at school today? It's just a trip to the water purification plant, big deal. I don't care how they make the water safe to drink. I like bottled water and use my allowance to buy it as often as I can. Eddie and I carry the bottles around all day, and sometimes I fill an empty bottle with water from the fountain. It's still better than tap water. I listened to the presentation about the big tanks, settling tanks, algae, and chemicals, trying to remember it all for the quiz later. Fortunately, I have a good memory for such things, unlike Eddie, who has trouble remembering details. I help him because he's my friend, and it's no big deal. All of this is just background noise in my mind. What I really worry about is Dad's call. Why hasn't he called? Of course, now is not the best time since I'm at school, but I keep my phone on, even in school. Only Eddie knows about it, so no one can tell me to turn it off. He'll probably call tonight on the way home. I think that's when he'll call. It's been long enough, and he knows I'm waiting. If I were him, I'd call tonight. The day drags on, Eddie makes smart remarks under his breath, and I struggle not to laugh. He's just trying to get me in trouble, so he can tease me. It was too funny not to laugh, so I did, and now the teacher is glaring at me while Eddie looks innocent. He knows, so he'll be on his guard, which makes it harder to get him back, but I will soon enough. Eddie is talking to one of the girls in our class that he has a thing for. He wants us to double date sometime, but I tried to tell him my mom would have a fit if I went out on a date. Anyway, after hours of boring stuff, school is finally over, and Eddie and I walk home. I have my cell phone in my hand, willing it to ring. It makes a sound like little bells ringing, so I know it's mine. Eddie watches me, looking disgusted. Come on, Ruben, he'll call when he's ready. He's a con and has to get permission to go anywhere. We don't know where he's at, so it might take him a lot of time to get it straightened out. You've got to wait, man. Yeah, I know that, but it's been almost a week since he said he'd call. Do you think he's changed his mind and doesn't want to see me? Maybe that's it, he doesn't want to see me after all this time. No, man. He told you he'd call, and he will. You just have to wait. He's the boss and knows what's best. Just be sure to tell me when he calls, okay? We walked along in silence, Eddie tossing a ball in the air while I just followed him. By the time it was time to part ways, Eddie heading toward the nicer homes and me toward the apartments, he still hadn't called. I was disappointed, but Eddie just said to be patient. What choice did I have? I waved to him and headed home. Another hour or so before Mom got there, but she wanted to know I was home and safe. I had no issue with that, knowing it was just her way. I went in, shut and locked the door, and then called to let her know I was home. She seemed in good spirits when she answered and promised to have something exciting to tell me when she got home, probably about one of her pets or something like that. At home, I left the phone turned on and laying on the table where it would stay until Mom got home. He still had time to call, he knew when Mom would be home, so he had time. I sat down with a Coke, watched the phone, and waited patiently. But when I heard her car pull in and stop, I turned the phone off and hid it in my room under the dresser. Maybe tomorrow. Mom came in with a pizza and some salads. She usually fixes something during the week, but tonight she must not have had time, or maybe she had plans for us to do something else. Whatever the reason, we had pizza. I loved pizza and didn't care why she made that choice. I got plates and napkins, and we sat down to eat, pepperoni and extra cheese, just like I preferred it. Pizza Hut too, man, this was a treat. We sat and ate, and I had 4 pieces to her 1.5. It was great. I sat back, full and satisfied, and smiled at Mom. Great meal, Mom. What's the occasion? Pizza is a real treat and not something you do very often. Did you get a promotion or something? Mom just smiled back at me, looking very pleased with herself. She looked down for a moment, then leaned back in her chair and said, "Guess what? I know you have a cell phone and that you talk to your dad. Did you think you could keep a secret like that from me? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" I was surprised. How could she know? Who told her? Eddie never would have told. So, who told you about my cell and that Dad called? Mom was grinning from ear to ear, laughing out loud and slapping the table in glee. Your father told me. He called to let me know you contacted him and that he wanted to come see both of us. He wants to see us, Ruben. Your father is coming Sunday night to spend a week with us. Really? Is he really coming this weekend? Where is he staying? How will we know where he'll be? Did he say where he was going to stay? Can he stay here with us? I can give him my room and sleep on the couch or in your room. Can he please, Mom? Ruben, calm down. I don't know where he will be staying yet. He said he would call as soon as he gets here. He has 5 days to spend with us, so there will be plenty of time to decide those things once he arrives. But Ruben, you have to let him decide what he wants to do and where he wants to stay. Understand? He isn't coming home to us, he's coming to visit, that's all. Do you understand? Yes, okay. I am just excited to see him after all this time. I was just a little kid when he left. He won't recognize me now. How will he know it's me? I sent pictures. Eileen gave them to him, so he knows what you look like now. He's your father, Ruben. He'll recognize you. Now, let me tell you how it's going to be. First, you have to stay in school, but he will pick you up after school and bring you home. Then you and he can talk and get acquainted. You'll have plenty of time to get to know him and for him to get to know you. I'll see both of you when I get home at my regular time. That's how it's going to be. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. He'll be there to pick me up after school. I can introduce Eddie to him. Eddie wants to meet him, and I said I would try. But if he picks me up at school, maybe both of us can ride home with him, and then Eddie can head home. Would that be okay, Mom? That sounds perfect. Now let's see what we have and what we need to get before he arrives. Let's make a list. Meanwhile, Carmine, now the die was cast. I had made my decision and had no choice but to follow through. I wanted to see Ruben again. It had been more than 7 years since I last saw him or talked with him. He must have grown so much. The picture showed the boy that was Ruben, but he looked so different from the child I remembered. I still thought of him as a 9-year-old, but that was in the past. He was now a young man of 15, and he would be almost a stranger to me, as I would be to him. But that would change quickly once I met him again. And Nancy, how would she react to my return? I had shut her out when everything happened. I had my reasons, and they were good ones, but would she understand them now? And what about what she did? How would I handle that? Time had passed, and so had many of our plans and dreams. I had to admit that when I tried to picture Nancy now, nothing came to mind. Maybe too much time had passed for us to have any basis for a friendship. Too many questions to answer and no foundation on which to base any answers. Whatever the future held, my path was ahead of me. There was no going back, no way to undo what had come and gone. We had all paid a price for what happened, and if I was honest, I considered the price paid in full. Whatever happened now was all new, and the past had no part in it. That was a lesson learned in prison, but an important one. We all believed it, and we all lived for it. I finished packing my meager belongings and threw the suitcase into the back of my pickup. I climbed in, started the engine, put the shift in drive, and was on my way. I lived in the northwest part of Columbus, not far from the clinic, which was located closer in and near the Brookside Country Club. For me, this would be an easy trip, just a short drive to Groveport proper. I had reservations at a Holiday Inn and promised to be there before 6 o'clock in the evening. It should be no problem. I drove, feeling the freedom to do something I hadn't done since I got out, travel. It was still a strange feeling at times to be free to do whatever I wanted without someone checking. I arrived at the Holiday Inn at 5 o'clock, checked in, and used cash for most of the room cost to avoid testing my new credit card limit. I gave the clerk $300 at check-in with instructions to use it before charging the card. The clerk, a young woman behind the counter, smiled and nodded her understanding. I found my room, unpacked my few belongings, and settled in. Not wanting Ruben or Nancy to know I was here already, I decided to drive by Ruben's school and, if I was feeling brave, by their house to see where they were living. I got into my truck and followed the directions Nancy had given me. 20 minutes later, I had successfully found the school and was now on my way to their address, tracing the route Ruben walked every day. I found the boulevard Nancy mentioned as the main road leading to her location. After driving for several minutes, I saw the street sign for her address. I followed it for another half-mile before I saw the subdivision with its cluster of homes. I pulled into one of the streets with the same name as her address and, a few minutes later, saw the house. It was a small, single-level home nestled among similar ones. Hers was set back a bit more from the street and was painted light blue with darker blue shutters. The yard and shrubs surrounding it were well tended, giving the impression of a well-cared-for home. It was so different from where we lived before I went to jail, different in size, location, and just the overall idea of living in a place like this. It was hard for me to grasp that my son and ex-wife lived here. As I slowed, I saw 2 bikes in the driveway next to the house. Inside the open garage, there was an older model Ford sedan. I continued slowly past and glimpsed into the backyard, where I spotted 2 young boys sitting around a small table, playing with an electronic game. I could tell one of them was Ruben, certain from the pictures Nancy sent that I recognized him. I'd know my son anywhere. I slowed and stopped on the street, unable to resist the temptation to watch. I observed them interacting, their friendship clear even from where I sat. As I was about to pull away, I saw her. She came out of the house with 2 cans of soda for the boys. I watched as they paused their game and took the cans from her hands, both being careful and nodding their thanks. She stood there talking to them and looking around the yard. I was too far away to see much of her face, but I was surprised to see she was still wearing those jeans and that t-shirt. The memory was still vivid, though it was from some time ago. Just as I was about to pull away, she turned and our eyes met. The tears that started when I first saw my son made it difficult to see clearly, but I could tell even from a distance that she recognized me. I panicked then, pressed the gas pedal hard, and raced away, my tires kicking up gravel as they gained traction. I didn't let up until I was out of sight and back on the main road leading to my hotel. I was shaking, making it hard to drive, so I slowed down and carefully made my way back to my room. Once inside, I collected my thoughts until I felt calm. I decided that a meal would help me regain control and figure out what to say when I called Nancy. I promised to let her know I was here and that I would pick Ruben up tomorrow after school. She trusted me with my son, and I wasn't going to jeopardize that trust now, not after seeing him today. I walked down to the lobby where a small restaurant was located. I had a meal, eating most of it by instinct, not really tasting anything, just focusing on nourishment. By the time I got back to my room, it was past 9 o'clock, and it was time to call. I picked up the phone and dialed. It rang twice before Nancy answered. Hello? Hello, Nancy, it's me, Carmine. I'm here as promised, and I just wanted to let you know I'll pick up Ruben as we agreed. I guess I'll see you when you get home. Is that still okay with you? It's fine, Carmine. Ruben. There was a slight hesitation, then she continued. I saw you today. That was you in the truck, wasn't it? Yes, Nancy, it was me. I'm sorry for doing that, but I just had to see where you and Ruben were living. I panicked when you turned around, and I left in a hurry. It's hard for me sometimes to remember that not everything I do that seems wrong is really wrong. Does that make any sense? I think so, but then I haven't had to live under the conditions you did for those 5 years. I guess it would make things strange at times. You have no idea, but it's not something I would encourage you to experience for yourself. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow. Is there anything I should bring or anything I should worry about? Nothing at all, Carmine. Just be yourself. You're his father, and that's all that's important to him. He never blamed you, you know. The only thing he said when I explained to him what I did and why you reacted the way you did was, I don't blame Dad for doing what he did, he had to do it. That's what your son said, Carmine, and that's how he feels. Maybe it's a good thing that I did come, Nancy. He has to understand that what I did was wrong. That's why I went to jail, because what I did was wrong. He has to know that I don't want him to think what I did was heroic or justified. It wasn't. But, Carmine, he understands that I was the one who caused you to act that way. It was not your fault. It was mine. He knows that I told him what I did to you, and he understands. He knows, Carmine. I owed both of you the truth. So when he asked, I told him about Hugo and what we were doing when you came home. No, Nancy, you're wrong. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Both of you need to understand. Until then, good night. I hung up, my frustration boiling over. How could she be so blind? She must know that her actions were never a justification for almost killing another man. Violence was not an acceptable option. I had seen the results of violence at the hospital, and I had vented my anger on those who caused such damage to others. I cursed them for their actions and the grief they caused. Yet, I had done the very thing I hated in others, the very thing I was against. How could she think I would put my son through the publicity and recriminations of a trial? Any actions we took would reflect on our son and on Nancy herself as the facts came out in public. I barely slept that night, keyed up by the thought of seeing and talking to my son for the first time in so long and needing to make them understand why I chose to go to jail. I had to make them see that I was wrong and explain my actions. Meanwhile, Ruben had called last night. I heard the phone ring and knew it had to be him. He was here in Groveport and was coming to see me after all this time. I wanted to answer the phone myself, but I knew Mom would have a fit if I did. She made me promise to wait and do things Dad's way. She said that if I didn't, Dad might just stay away. I thought she was crazy, but she knew him better than I did. So, I heard the phone ring and I just knew. I fell asleep thinking about what was going to happen the next day. The next day was one of the longest of my life. I told Eddie that Dad would pick us up after school and that I would have some time alone with him, just the two of us, until Mom got home. Then, we would all be together again, just like before. I remember Dad coming home all tired and smelling of chemicals. After he changed and showered, he was my dad again. We all laughed a lot, and Mom hardly ever got angry or cried like she does now. Then everything changed. Dad went away, Mom cried all the time, and things weren't so good anymore. Oh yes, I remembered. Finally, it was 3:30, and the bell rang for the last class of the day. I grabbed my books, slammed them in my locker, spun the combination lock, and headed for the huge double doors at the front of the school. They would be open now, and kids would be pouring out, heading home. I stopped by the display case just inside the doors to wait for Eddie. When he finally came down the hall, we ran out the front doors and down the 16 steps to the ground. Eddie and I ran to the front of the school and stopped, looking around. Then I saw him. He was standing in front of an old red Ford pickup truck. It looked like it had been around for many years, but that wasn't important. What was important to me was that he was there. I recognized him right away. "Come on, Eddie, there he is. There's my dad." I grabbed Eddie by the arm and started pulling him toward my dad. Dad watched us and then stepped away from the truck to wait for me to get there. When I did, I stopped in front of him and stared at the man I hadn't seen in 7 years. He looked at me and smiled. Then, without warning, he lifted me off the ground with his strong arms, holding me so tight that I was having trouble breathing. "Dad, come on. You're suffocating me. Put me down." I was laughing and crying at the same time, not feeling the least bit ashamed. This was my dad. He finally let me go, stepped back, and said, "I'm sorry, son. I didn't mean to embarrass you. And who's your friend? Is this the famous Eddie?" Eddie puffed up his chest and said, "Hi, Mr. Montoya. It's good to meet you. I'm Eddie, Rue's best friend. Me and him are buddies, right, Rue?" I just nodded, still trying to catch my breath. Finally, after all these years, Dad was here. I was still catching my breath as we got into the pickup and headed for the entrance to our place. Eddie came with us as far as the junction, and when Dad said he could drive Eddie the rest of the way, Eddie declined, saying he didn't want Dad to see where he lived. Eddie was embarrassed that his parents had money and we didn't, but I didn't think it was so bad. That was Eddie's choice. I told him I would call later, and we drove the rest of the way home. Dad seemed to know right where to go, so we were home quickly. I spent the next couple of hours with Dad, catching up and telling him all about me and Mom and what we had been doing since we moved. I didn't remember all that much about before, but he didn't seem to mind. He just seemed happy to listen, and I had no problem sharing everything I had been keeping inside until I could see him again. It felt like a dam had broken as we talked. I looked at him and tried to see how he compared to before. He was quieter now, not talking or laughing as much, and he seemed sadder somehow. He looked the same, tall, over 6 feet, not too heavy, with dark hair now touched with gray, and eyes not as bright as I remembered. But maybe my memory was at fault. He sounded the same, deep voice, same laugh, same grin when I said something funny or stupid. No, he was the same but also different. He called to order pizza, and we drank Pepsis and talked until Mom came home. I noticed Dad got really quiet when I told him I heard her car pull in. She was right on time as usual. He stood up and watched as she put her key in the door and pushed it open. She came in, threw her keys on the small hall table as usual, slipped off her jacket, and dropped her purse on the chair by the door. She didn't look up until she had done these routines. They just stood there looking at each other, and I was about to say something to break the tension when the doorbell rang. I think it was the pizza guy. Meanwhile, Nancy had a hard time focusing on her job all day. She was preoccupied with thoughts of Ruben and his father. She knew it was good for Ruben and that Carmine needed to see his son. She had no problem with that and was being honest when she said she would trust Ruben's safety to Carmine. Carmine would never do anything to cause pain for Ruben. Even going to prison was an attempt to spare his son the pain of seeing his father in jail. Carmine told me that, and I believed him. He gave up his freedom partly to spare his son. I looked at the clock again and saw that I had a little over an hour to go. I knew they were together now, probably sitting at home and catching up on the past. Ruben had so much he wanted to tell his father and so many questions to ask. I was almost finished with the Labrador I was working on, giving him a flea dip, trimming his coat, and cutting his nails. He was a sweetheart of a dog, and his patience was remarkable. He let me do as I wished without any problems. I talked to him as I worked, and I believe he understood me better than I understood myself. After putting him in his holding cage until his master picked him up, I looked at the clock again and saw that my time was up. I could go home now and face my demons. I washed up, changed out of my smock, and put on my jacket, routine tasks that felt mechanical. I said my goodbyes and headed out to drive the short distance home. It was time to face Carmine for the first time since he saw me with Hugo. I remembered that day so clearly and tried over the years to forget it, but without success. I couldn't get Carmine's pain look out of my head. Why couldn't I forget it after all it had cost me? Why was it still haunting me? I was so lost in thought that I was almost unaware of where I was until I pulled into my driveway. The first thing I noticed was the red pickup truck parked there. It had to be Carmine's. Funny thing was, I almost remembered Carmine talking about owning a truck. Was that a memory? I believed it was. I turned off the ignition, gathered my purse and jacket, and sat in my car, trying to muster the courage to go inside. I realized I hadn't thought to prepare anything for dinner. Should I have stopped for takeout? Should I have cooked something? What did Carmine like now? Had his tastes changed? He had been on his own for a while. I shook my head, recognizing that I was just stalling, looking for any reason not to go inside my own home. I walked slowly to the door, used my key to open it, and walked in, dropping my keys and jacket where I always did. I hesitated, afraid to look up and see him standing there. How did I know he would be standing? He always did it at home. If I had been out and he was home, he would stand when I opened the door. It was Carmine's way. I took a deep breath and looked up. He was standing there in the doorway to the kitchen, where he and Ruben had been sitting. I looked into his eyes and saw my Carmine. He was still there, but there were changes. I don't know what I was expecting, but what I saw was my Carmine, not the same man he was before. There was less happiness in his eyes, and a hint of pain, different from what I remembered. The spontaneity and amusement I had loved were no longer part of this new Carmine. He was here, but he had changed. Only time would tell if those changes were permanent and if they were for the better. I was just about to say something to break the silence when the doorbell rang. I was so startled that I almost screamed. Ruben said, "That's the pizza Dad ordered." "Can you let him in, Mom?" The sound of the doorbell broke the tension and the silence between Nancy and me. For my part, the shock of seeing her for the first time in all those long, difficult years was so intense that I was struck speechless. The pleasure I felt was unexpected. I expected anger, resentment, maybe even pain, but all I recognized was a strange pleasure. I was sure the other feelings were there. I had experienced them all before, but seeing her up close was different. As Nan turned toward the door to open it, I had a few seconds to catch my breath and calm myself. I had to be very careful. My feelings were in chaos, and my control was ragged. Over the past 5+ years, I had learned control and patience, but those were for things I could manage, things that were predictable, with clear rewards and consequences. They never included wives, ex-wives, or children, things that were part of a civilized life. Prison was far from civilized. It was a dog-eat-dog world where the strong survived, and the weak succumbed. And the result was a culture where those with skills, talents, or knowledge that could be leveraged for something better were the winners. The weak or ignorant looked to others for their survival, often at the cost of their dignity. I was one of the more fortunate. I had learned to take advantage when it benefited me. Compassion was not a survival emotion in prison, and my compassion had been suppressed for a long time. My work at the clinic was slowly reviving that forgotten emotion, and I was trying very hard to remember what it felt like. This is how my mind was functioning now, and it would dictate my actions toward Nan as this first meeting progressed. I know that sounds cold and distant, but my reality for 5 years, 6 months, and 3 days had been an 8x12 cell. My return to civilized behavior was not easily accomplished for someone who had lived alone for the last 2 years. During that time, my only contact with society had been through a clinic that treated those in pain and sadness. As I watched Nan take the pizza and reach into her purse to pay the delivery boy, I remembered my manners and walked toward her. "Please, Nan, I ordered pizza since Ruben mentioned it was one of his favorites, but I should have asked you first. I'm sorry. Here, I have the money." I handed the boy a 20 and told him to keep the change. Money wasn't a problem for me with what I was earning at the clinic, and with my modest lifestyle, I had money but no real life. Nancy backed away and walked toward the kitchen with the pizza. I imagined she wanted time to manage her own feelings. Maybe this visit was a bad idea, but it was too late to worry about it now. Once the delivery boy had left, I closed the door and walked into the kitchen, where Reuben and his mother were already sitting down. I stood there for a moment, then took the chair at the head of the table. It made me uneasy, as it should have been Nan's chair, not mine. But as a guest, I had little choice, since the only other vacant chair was holding the pizza box. Nancy got paper plates and set them in front of us, opened the pizza, and used her fingers to place slices on our plates. The first went to Reuben, who eagerly rolled it into a tube before taking his first bite. As she put mine on my plate, she looked briefly into my eyes, and I felt a fleeting shiver. She held my gaze for a moment before turning away and sitting down in her own chair. I was left to wonder what I was seeing in those blue eyes. I once knew what she was thinking, but that was no longer the case since that afternoon when my world changed drastically. I tried to set those thoughts aside as I continued talking with Reuben. He told me about his friend and their plans for the coming summer break. They were planning to join the Y swim team and enter competitions. He and Eddie were good swimmers and had high hopes of winning medals. I listened with minimal comment and enjoyed hearing about my son's excitement. I began to realize what I had missed and what I almost deprived myself of by refusing to see them again. I thanked God that Reuben had reached out and pulled me from my self-imposed isolation. Reuben must have been wiser than his years. After finishing off 3 slices of pizza, he said he had to go over to Eddie's house for a project and would be gone for about an hour. He told me not to leave before he got back, and I assured him I would wait. He looked at his mother, who smiled at him, kissed his forehead, and walked him to the door. She lowered her face to his ear and whispered something that made him blush and rush out. Instead of being interested in their shared secret, I saw only the closeness between them, a reminder of what family meant. As the door closed, Nancy turned to me and asked if I would like to join her in the small family room after she got some coffee. I nodded and moved into the room, noting the couch and 2 side chairs. I took one of the side chairs, but it was uncomfortable, so I finally got up and took a seat on the couch. The side chairs were not suited to someone my size. Nancy, meanwhile, wasn't surprised when Reuben said he was going over to Eddie's. I understood that he wanted to give me time with Carmine without overhearing. I walked him to the door, whispered my gratitude, and made him blush. He couldn't leave fast enough. I watched him go, then turned to Carmine and asked him to join me in the family room for coffee. I went into the kitchen, poured the coffee into a decorative pitcher, and added 2 cups to a small tray. Carmine took his black, or at least he used to, and I used a small amount of cream. I fixed the cups and carried the tray into the family room. I was pleased to see Carmine on the couch, so I set the tray on the coffee table in front of him and joined him on the couch. We sat at opposite ends of the couch. I had thought about this meeting so many times over the years that its occurrence was never in doubt, at least in my own mind. One way or another, I was going to tell Carmine my side of the story and let him decide how he would respond. I had rehearsed the words I would say, they were burned into my memory and clear as a bell. Now was the time to begin. I handed him the cup of coffee, and when he took it, I placed my hand over his on the cup and looked into his eyes. I opened my mouth to begin recounting the events of that day, the story of what Hugo and I did, and why we ended up where we did. I had planned to tell him the whole sordid tale from beginning to end. But instead, what came out was, "Carmine, I'm so sorry for what I did to you. Can you ever forgive me?" When she sat down on the couch, I was initially uncomfortable. However, her sitting so far away helped me relax. Having her this close was more than I had anticipated. We were supposed to sit across from each other, our hands neatly folded in front of us, our faces relaxed and calm. I would share a bit about my life with Jerry and what I was doing, and then she would tell me about her life and what she had been doing, perhaps some details about Reuben's life as well. That was how it should have been. What actually happened was that she blurted out, "Carmine, I'm so sorry for what I did to you. Can you ever forgive me?" What was I supposed to do with that? How was I going to handle it? I had forgotten all of that years ago. I went to jail, but that was my decision and had little to do with her actions. I would have stayed and tried to work everything out if I hadn't lost control and nearly killed Hugo. I knew I had given her ample reasons to do what she did, working long hours, leaving the raising of our son to her, running the house, and living alone without a husband most of the time. When I had a chance to change my lifestyle to something more manageable, she let me turn it down. She shouldn't have done it at all, but I had given her reasons. I wasn't the type to say, divorce her, kick her out, look at me, I'm so perfect. I could have been a hypocrite and done the high and mighty thing, but I wasn't that kind of person. Sure, she had cheated, but so what? We could deal with it. I loved her, and I believed she loved me. There had to be a reason for her actions. I never asked her to explain, and why would I destroy the home my son was a part of, break up our family because of my pride and macho feelings? Maybe some would, but I loved my son and my wife. What gave me the right to destroy all of that for my own pride? She looked at me with surprise, her words seeming to surprise her as much as they did me. I had to answer her, had to say something. I closed my mouth, trying to find the words that would address her question. I mentally shrugged and thought, just go with it and see what happens. I put my cup down, leaned toward her, and said, I forgave you a few years ago, Nan. I didn't go to jail to punish you, it was to punish myself for what I did. You have to understand that I went to jail because I almost killed a man. Regardless of what he did, no one deserves to die for that. If you hadn't stopped me, I would have killed him. Her eyes widened, and her mouth formed a small O. I hope she understood what I was trying to convey. I didn't want her to blame herself any longer. She wasn't at fault for what I did. As a matter of fact, all the attorneys wanted me to plead temporary insanity or diminished capacity, so what I did couldn't be blamed on her. If I had been in my right mind, I might have reacted with anger, yelled, threatened, or done something similar. I might even have been so angry that I would have divorced her anyway, but I doubt it. I know I wouldn't have tried to kill him with my son's baseball bat. I'm sorry I couldn't talk to you then, Nan. I know you tried to help me, and I appreciate it. You wanted me to plead not guilty, but I couldn't do that. I would have continued hitting him with that bat until I collapsed if you hadn't stopped me. When I woke up from that state, I realized what I almost did, and it left me paralyzed with fear that I could do something like that even to you and Ruben. I couldn't put you and Ruben through a trial that would bring out my actions and put you on trial as well. The press would have had a field day with it. I couldn't do that to Ruben or to you. What I did was what I had to do. You must understand that. How could I let my son see me in that light, with his friends at school taunting him about his father or his mother? Face it, Nan, they would have used those terms, and you know it. I wasn't crazy, and you weren't at fault. What I did was what I had to do. I paid for my crime, and now it's done. It's over, and I just want to move on with my life and learn to live in society again. I want to reconnect with my son, I've missed so much. Nancy had listened patiently while I spoke. Parts of what I said hurt her, evident from the way her lips quivered and the tears she shed at certain points. But I was being truthful, and sometimes the truth hurts. Now it was her turn to speak. I heard Carmine's words with equal parts sadness and shock. He said he blamed himself for what happened, which was news to me. The lawyers had convinced me that he wasn't guilty of trying to kill Hugo because he was genuinely impaired in his judgment due to his extended working hours. Even the district attorney said so, though he couldn't stop Carmine from pleading guilty. I could understand his perspective, too. Carmine was a doctor who practiced medicine out of a desire to help people. Money was never his motivator. He was well paid only because he was so good at what he did. Carmine would look at what he did with horror and take full responsibility without considering the cost to himself. That was who Carmine was all those years ago and who he still was. What mattered most to me was that Carmine put me and Ruben first when everything happened. He went to jail to spare us from the aftermath. What he did almost drove me to madness. He forgave me years ago, how could he have done that? What I did wasn't easy to forgive. I hadn't even managed to forgive myself. It made me think about what Carmine had been living with all these years. He felt guilty and believed he went to jail to atone for his actions, but the real fault lay with me. If I hadn't been with Hugo that day, none of this would have happened. Carmine needed to know that. Carmine had said what he needed to say. Now it seemed he was giving me the chance to say everything I wanted to say to him all those years ago. I sat up straight on the couch, turned to face him, and began, Carmine, I have to tell you that you were wrong. This was never your fault. I was the one who started the chain of events that ended with you going to jail. It was my fault that Hugo was in our bedroom. It was my fault that we ended up together. It was my fault, Carmine, and you were just caught up in my mistakes. I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I apologize for everything you had to go through because of me. When I saw you with that bat and the look on your face, I knew in that instant that my life was over. I was afraid you were going to kill Hugo, and that's why I intervened. I couldn't let you go to jail for something that was my fault. I realized then that I had made a terrible mistake. I had to stop you from doing something irreversible, not to save Hugo but to save you. But when I saw your eyes, I became afraid. You were someone else then. I told the lawyer that, and he agreed that you were not yourself. Why didn't you let us help you avoid prison, Carmine? Why did you give up your son and your freedom for something I did? Carmine listened to me with a calm demeanor and warm eyes. He heard me, of that I was certain, but he was shaking his head, denying my words. I had to try again. Please, Carmine, I know I hurt you and our family. Ruben paid a price for my actions, and I paid a terrible price as well, but that was only right. I was guilty, not you. I can't forgive myself for what I did to you and the price you had to pay for it. I'll never forgive myself. Nancy, you must forgive yourself, Carmine said. I was the one who failed you and Ruben. I should have stayed and faced you, worked with you to save our family. Maybe it wouldn't have worked, and we would have separated anyway, but I should have tried. Instead, I took a bat and tried to kill a man instead of working within the laws to find a better way. What I said about the papers was true. I spared you and Ruben the humiliation of a trial that would have been vicious. I couldn't let that happen to Ruben or to you. Please, Nan, forgive yourself. I have forgiven you. I have even learned to forgive myself for what I did. I looked into his eyes and believed him. He had forgiven me and himself and found peace with what happened. But a new thought occurred to me. How did he feel about me? Was that thought selfish? Was it unworthy of me at that moment? He was here to see his son, not me, but the thought nagged at me. I searched my heart for the courage to ask. Carmine, can I say something to you now, something you might not want to hear? Carmine looked at me with a smile and nodded. Say anything, Nan, and I'll listen and try to answer any questions you may have. I still love you as much as I did before. Carmine, I never stopped, and there has never been anyone else for me before or since. Hugo had nothing to do with my love for you. You can believe that. Now for the real question, I said. Carmine was just watching me, his expression unreadable. I had to ask, can I ask how you feel about me, Carmine? Carmine continued to look at me, his expression giving nothing away. I began to fidget nervously, awaiting his answer. He stood up and walked toward the window, his back to me, his posture reflecting a sort of firmness. Maybe he was about to tell me that he no longer had any feelings for me. I wouldn't be surprised and I wouldn't blame him, but that's not what he said. Nancy, how I feel is rather complicated. I never stopped loving you or Ruben. When I made my decision to go to jail, I did it for the reasons I've shared with you. I believed I was doing the right thing for us as a family. I did that out of love for both of you. You have to understand that. But at the same time, even though I took responsibility for putting you in a position where things went wrong, I still struggle to understand why you acted as you did. I've found peace with myself and with your actions, but it took a long time to heal. I needed that time, and so did you. In my mind, our marriage had to end, the conditions were not going to change, and what happened was inevitable. No, Carmine, no, I interrupted. I did something that I still can't explain to you. I was the one who made mistakes that affected you and our family. I know how you feel about what you did, but you have to see that it was my actions that put you in that situation. You would never hurt anyone. You were so tired and mentally exhausted that when you saw me betraying you, you just snapped. That was all my fault and mine alone. That situation will never happen again. Carmine was shaking his head but turned to look at me again. His eyes were filled with tears he refused to shed. I felt a need to go to him and take him into my arms, but I was terrified to move, not out of fear of Carmine, but of his reaction. I couldn't bear to be rejected, that would have been devastating. No, Nan, our marriage had to end. We had grown apart with my long hours and you hating to be alone. Ruben was all that was holding us together. I was so absorbed in my work at the hospital that I often failed to think about either of you until I was on my way home. That was wrong. You and Ruben should have been my first priority. My job should have been just that, a job. I've come to understand that, and now I'm doing what I should have been doing before. I work at a job I like, but the job is not my life. But where does that lead us, Carmine? What do we do now? Just see each other when you come to see Ruben or when I come to get him. Is that all that's left between us? I asked. I can't believe that, Carmine. I just can't. You and I are two different people now, Carmine replied. How do we know how we'll feel after a while? You remember me as I was. I'm no longer the same man. I've learned things no civilized person should know and sometimes react in ways that are inappropriate. I can be dangerous to those around me. I have to remind myself every day that I'm free to do as I wish, and that is a huge responsibility for someone who never had to face restrictions. I always had it easy, and when it came time to act responsibly, I almost hurt someone badly without thinking. I should have been thinking about you, Ruben, and my responsibilities, and I failed you. Carmine, you have been around others who have also failed, and you now believe that you will fail again. I don't believe that you've changed. I see it in your eyes. You're the same man I knew and loved, and that hasn't changed. You may think differently, but I know better. You weren't in your right mind when you did those things. As for Ruben and me, you never failed us. I certainly did, and that is the truth. But not you. You were doing what you loved, and when someone needed you, you went. I should have honored my vows to remain faithful, and I didn't. To this day, I don't know why other than letting myself drink too much when with another man who turned out to be a predator. That was my failing, Carmine, not yours. And just so you know, Carmine, Hugo promised to come after you when you got out. He was talking about civil court and suing you for all he could get. That's another thing I'm responsible for. So you see, you didn't fail us, I did. Carmine and I talked for the rest of the evening until Ruben came back. We resolved nothing, but we did begin to understand each other better. It was strange. At times, it felt so natural for him to be there talking to me. At other times, the differences between the man he was and who he had become were clear. I found the new Carmine to be as wonderful as the older version, but that was because I still loved the memory of him. Carmine was trying to make me see that Carmine and Ruben spent another hour together talking about what they had been doing. It was wonderful to see the bond that still existed between father and son. For some reason, that hit me harder than anything, knowing I was responsible for breaking that bond in the first place. But at least it wasn't a permanent thing. Ruben finally began to show his age as his eyes started to close despite his protestations that he wasn't tired. I knew he hadn't slept last night, and it was catching up with him. Carmine noticed it too and urged Ruben to go to bed, promising that he would still be around for the next few days. Ruben finally left, grinning after Carmine hugged him and I kissed his cheek. Well, Nancy, I should be going. What is your schedule like for tomorrow? I'd like to spend some more time with both of you, of course, but you and I should talk some more. I'll get Ruben off to school and then call in for time off. I have a lot of vacation time coming, so it should be no problem. Is that okay with you? That would be perfect. I could take you out for breakfast if you'd like to go, I said. Any time is fine with me. Why don't you pick me up about 8:30? We can get breakfast and then spend some more time talking. Perfect, Carmine said. He rose and headed toward the door. I followed behind, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Whatever it was, I was prepared for it, and I hoped that things could continue to develop. But that was only my hope. I had no idea what Carmine wanted. As he opened the door, he turned, looked back at me, and said, "This went better than I had hoped. Thank you for seeing me, and thank you for making Ruben into the fine young man he is. Good night, and I'll see you tomorrow." With that, he was gone. This time, I knew he'd be back. Meanwhile, as I drove back to the motel, I reviewed the entire evening in my mind. Ruben was a great boy, and I was impressed with both him and his initiative. There was little question that Nancy had raised him well and instilled many wonderful qualities in him. I enjoyed my time with him and knew that I could never walk away from him again. I was in his life to stay now. Nancy was just as I remembered her. She looked exactly as she did back then, and if possible, she had become even more beautiful. For my information, she never dated or saw other men socially. That was interesting. But as I told her and as I fully believed, our marriage had to end. We really were two different people now. But that begged the question, how did I feel about her now? I had struggled for the past several years with that question, long before I came to meet them, and didn't want to face the answer. But I knew the answer as soon as she walked in the door today. Well, that was for another discussion. Tomorrow was just to find my son and his mother again. Back at the motel, I picked up the phone and placed a call. It was to a contact number I was given by my friend Pan Pan. Pan Pan and I had become friends in prison when he developed a problem that I was able to diagnose. I talked to the prison doctor who knew my background and recommended the proper course of treatment. It involved some laser surgery to reattach a torn retina, but it was relatively straightforward, and he was able to schedule it for Pan Pan, who believed he was going blind. He was grateful and promised to pay me back someday. What I wanted was fairly simple, so I told the man at the other end of the phone who I was, who had given me the number, and all he said was, "Whatever you need, consider it done." I then gave him Hugo Bentz's name and previous location and told him that Hugo had promised to sue me in civil court and that I would appreciate anything he could do to prevent that. I offered to pay him the going rate for whatever he did, and he simply said, "No charge." Pan Pan said to take care of you. As I said, consider it done. Thanks, and please give my regards to Pan Pan. I'm still on probation and can't contact him. Will you do that? I asked. Consider it done, he replied. A man of few words, but they were the words I wanted to hear. He hung up, and that was that. See, what did I tell you? Prison friends are not like any other friends you'll ever make. Those friends are forever, and when they say they'll be there for you, they mean it. All I have to give, if called upon, is money, but believe me, if one of them asks, I'll answer. Like the man at the other end of the phone, no questions asked. I never heard a word from Hugo Bentz then or later. Meanwhile, hey, Ruben, are you going to see your dad this weekend? And what's up with your mom and dad now? Anything happening? Eddie asked, tossing a ball into the air and pretending it was a fly ball that he caught with his glove. We were walking toward the ballpark, hoping to get into a pickup game. Eddie was really good and wanted to play for the majors someday. I guess he had a chance. Well, I don't know for sure, Eddie, but they've been spending a lot of time together lately. Dad came down last weekend, and he and Mom went out to dinner again. They do that a lot, maybe to get away from me. I don't mind because I like it that they get together. Maybe they're doing it, what do you think? Eddie was laughing, and I decided not to take him seriously. If I did, I'd have to hit him. He didn't duck or anything, so I took it as a funny comment. Nah, they don't even stay out that late. They always come home pretty early and pick me up from Mrs. Evans' place. We sometimes go out for ice cream before Dad goes back to his motel. Mom keeps asking him to stay, but he won't. I even told him I'd give him my bed and sleep on the floor in my sleeping bag, but he says it's best if he stays at the motel. I don't see why. When I go to see him, I have my own room in his place. Yeah, his place. What's it like? Is it neat? I bet he has a huge place all by himself. I've only been there twice, you know, and actually, it's pretty much of a dump. It's in a real bad part of town, and it's old and run down. His stuff is okay, and the big screen TV is really cool, but the rest is like his truck, just cheap and old and used. But it's okay with me, just to be with him. We go lots of places, and I go with him when he stops in at his clinic. He's part owner, you know. Cool dude. Hey, come on, I see some guys ready to play some ball. Come on, Ruben, let's get there before they choose up sides. I followed Eddie to the park and decided to sit the first game out. Eddie just shrugged his shoulders and went out to play center field. I sat down on the bench and watched. I was thinking about the question Eddie asked about my folks. I knew that Mom wanted Dad to come home to stay with us, but I knew Dad was not ready to do that. Mom was happier now that Dad was with us, even part-time. She dressed a lot nicer, took more care of herself, and even did something with her hair. It seemed lighter now and a lot prettier. Even I could see that. Dad told me a couple of times that he wanted to be part of the family again and wanted to spend more time with both of us. I thought that was a good sign and asked him if he and Mom were going to get married again so we could all be together. He didn't answer right away, but I saw his smile before he said that it was possible. I thought that was a good sign too, but maybe it will take more time. I don't know. I just hoped that it would happen. As I thought about it, I was pretty sure things would work out. Just then, Eddie called me and told me to take first base. The kid playing first had to go home for some reason, so I grabbed my mitt and took my place. I stopped thinking about my parents when the first ball was hit right to me. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.